Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. Let's go! Well, I could have started today from kabooms in Russia and so on, but for us the most important stuff is happening over here with the Russian debt. There is the analytic, his name is Greg Kennedy, and he analyzed what is happening with the Russian bank sector, with the Russian loans and the Russian budget. And he opened the eyes on the real situation in the Russian economy. And we now understand the main answer on the question of how Russia is still capable to maintain its military. Well, here you can see the graph of the corporate credit surge, which happened in July 2022. And that surge is because Russia invests everything to military, but they take money from banks like loans. And this surge is 71%, which is $415 billion. And the corporate credit for the time surged to totally 249 billion. That sum Russia cannot compensate with anything, even with the oil. Actually, the debt is more than the income of the Russian oil totally. Since July 2022, the corporate borrowing has significantly exceeded government borrowing. Again, it means that the Russian corporates, including military, are taking funds from the Russian banks as loans. But those loans in a long-term perspective cannot be covered. But there will be the moment then those banks will need to cover the debt. And here we have two of the way outs. Russian government compensates those funds, or almost all of the Russian banks just go bankrupt. If I speak about the first choice, whether Russia can compensate those funds, no, as I said to you, it's too much. They need to compensate roughly $250 billion, which they may potentially get if the sanctions on Russia would be just lifted. But I think that there is no perspective for this scenario too. Just to remind you, Russia kept in Western banks roughly $300 billion before the war. I think that it was a really stupid move from Russia to save money there if they wanted to start the war. And it also tells us that those economy bureaucrats, they were unaware that Putin made the decision to start this war. But the Russian defense budget is still maintained at that sustainable level. Again, because of the oil income, Russia may compensate the part of the debt, but the next part, like the next 50%, Russia just cannot cover. And that second half mostly is the Russians off-budget defense funding. And this thing is actually driving Russian inflation, pushing the interest rate up to 21%, but it was forecasted for even more. But Putin, with his decision, said that no, it's better not to rise the key rate right now. But anyways, this year we're gonna see maybe even 24%. The key rate of 21% means that the central bank may lower its funds, so rubles or whatsoever, with this key rate to the other private or government banks. The Russian central bank should be a little aside of Russian government and Russian ruling, but actually it is within it. So the money goes as the borrow to the private banks, but for them to loan the funds to the Russian private sector, to the Russian companies, including military, they raise the stake up to 24%, something like that. They have at least 3% profit, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 1, but banks cannot work without profit. So the rate for the Russian people is absolutely crazy. It's up to 26, 27% sometimes. But anyways, you understand the mathematics, and it makes the lives for ordinary Russians just crazy. They cannot afford to get hypothec or credits to buy apartments or houses. But the only way for them to get this is to go to the Russian army. By the way, the funds for the Russian soldiers, they are not going from the Russian military budget. No, those are the local funds, let's say, of Moscow, of Belgorod region, and so on. So every region pays its own sum for the military. We call it подъемные, so it's not a salary, but the money you get right away after you sign the contract. And any sort of the economy is unable to grow with this huge key rate. And Kremlin by the late 2024 already understood this critical situation, and now they have a dilemma whether to continue to use the scheme or not, because war takes the resources from the Russian economy. Just the military budget they can sustain, but they cannot sustain their own economy, because people are coming disabled to the Russian society. If some Russian soldier is zeroed on the front line, there should be compensation, huge compensation for his family. And we see how Russia tries to avoid paying those bills. We know that from the stories of the Russian soldiers. They say that the Russian command gave the orders to zero heavy wounded personnel. They also avoid giving official confirmation about the KIA of the Russian soldiers. They say that your father, your son is missing. In that case, they do not pay for the families until the body is found. But many bodies, as you understand, will never be found. But even with those absolutely inhumane measures, Russian economy still needs to pay a lot for its wounded soldiers and disabled soldiers. Plus, if we speak about the Russian soldiers, those who left their jobs and went to the army because they need lots of the money right here, right now, and do not hesitate to put their own lives at risk, still there should be someone who would do their job behind the front lines in Russia. And the companies have to spend additional funds for the training of the personnel. Also, we know that roughly 700,000 Russian men left Russia because they are afraid of conscription and mobilization. It is understandable fear, and every Russian man has a huge risk actually staying in Russia. But who left Russia? Younger generation, the most capable one, IT specialists, engineers. So Russia actually is in trouble with its man force, not on the front lines only, no, but also in their economy. And Russia's economy struggles to find workers as defense sector poaches staff, so many Russian men going to protect their motherland, as they call it, and many guys just left the country. That's why they now struggle with workers. They have to raise the salary for those because there's deficit. I'm sure that Russian economy will not survive this war if Putin will continue it. And you know, guys, there is no sign that Putin is really willing to stop this war. He'll go all in till the Russian economy collapses, total kaput. You know, after all, Putin is not interested in his country, in his people. He is interested in his geopolitical madness. There was absolutely no reason to start this full-scale war against Ukraine, but he started it. It means that he is not adequate. He thinks differently, and facts is nothing for him. So soon all of the Russia would look like that. This is what is happening outside Moscow and St. Petersburg. Most of the Russia lives like that. I would say that it's even a luxury resort, because on one of the photos, I think over here, I saw, yeah, this is the pipeline which delivers the natural gas to this building. And you know, guys, I saw it myself back in 2009. Then I was on my pilot training. It was the line training organized by UTair Airlines. By the time they hired Ukrainian pilots and opened the daughter airline in Ukraine. But to fly in Ukraine, firstly, I needed to pass the training on ATR airplane in Surgut and Tyumen. And they have those kind of the buildings there a lot. And what else? I mentioned that locals, they don't like those who live in Moscow. They don't like Moscow at all. I speak Russian but different accent, and some locals ask me if I am from Moscow. And then I told that I'm originally from Crimea, Ukraine. They said, oh, good, not from Moscow. It was the first and the last time for me staying in Russia for such a long period of time. I tried to avoid political topics by the time, but there were some of the people who supported Putin, even though I didn't ask them. They told me. But some people, as I understood, they hated Putin. Probably now they hate him even more. And you know that many of the Ukrainians were deported from Ukraine after the Second World War. Stalin just sent them to Siberia, to Khabarovsk, to those kind of the regions. So ethnically, there are many of the Ukrainians live in Siberia. Also in the Central Asia, by the way, but there mostly Tatars were sent. Stalin expelled them from Crimea and part of the Ukrainians from Ukraine. Guys, I cannot show you this video fully, it's not for everyone. Those are the Russian soldiers. And with this video, they just confirmed the situation that I've just told you about the wounded Russian army personnel. A soldier who films this video say that there was the attack from the Russian side, it was repelled, they have tremendous losses. Those who were lucky but wounded retreated to the local trench or bunker, and they immediately called for evacuation. And they definitely heavy wounded. If you look at my Telegram, you will see this video. But the Russian command told them that there will be no evacuation provided. And they also say that they should shut up and prepare for one more attack tomorrow morning. Well, guys, saying that kind of the stuff, I think it's beyond craziness. It's like the hell on earth, really. But Russians, they signed contracts on their own. No one pushed them to do it. They just want money. Their financial situation, let's say, tells them to go to the Russian army, and also propaganda, by the way. But still, there is no like forced mobilization in Russia, but I think it will be announced in the future because, as I've told you, Putin wants to continue. And the cameraman here was really surprised with this attitude, and he said that not everyone will survive this night, not even saying about the prospect of tomorrow's attack. Like for me, guys, it's really beyond understanding of how Russia just wastes their soldiers. And this Russian soldier said that he has the second wound, he was evacuated, he was lucky, but the commander of his brigade or regiment, he wants money, like a real bribe. Pay us what government paid for you, then you sign the contract, or else we send you to the front lines again. And it is not just a single story. There is huge corruption in the Russian army and lack of morale, especially from those commanders. So he is now in a hospital, he doesn't know what to do, and he recorded this video. Because, you know, he signed the contract to get the funds for his family and so on, but now his commanders told him to give that money back, but in this case not to the government, but in commander's pocket. Wow. Here are the Russian soldiers. Those who were very lucky, they've been delivered to Russia back on a special flight of Ilyushin 76. So they have 3-story beds here. And the airplane is fully packed. Well, I guess that those are not average Russian soldiers, because Russia actually has 2 of the armies, Mobiks and mobilized soldiers plus ex-prisoners who are just been sent to the straightforward attacks. They don't have that good equipment and so on, but they're also capable Russian troops, ex-Wagners, paratroopers, special forces, and obviously Russia is interested to take care about those. Maybe they're gonna fight for Russia once again. It was the tactics of the Wagner army that they use prisoners for the straightforward attacks, but attack with their capable forces with experience from the flanks. Sorry guys, I cannot show you this one, but there's the Russian soldier standing close to the tree, actually tightened by the tape to the tree. Well, who did it? Not the Ukrainian side, but the Russian one. Ukraine filmed it. What is happening here that the Russian army just sacrifices their soldiers to the god. God is Baba Yaga, Ukrainian drone, which usually operates during the night time and it targets infantry and some of the vehicles. And they do it to their own soldiers because they want to punish those for the attempt to get away and leave the positions. Basically desert from the Russian army, or they may do like that for the attempt to surrender to Ukrainian side. And of course Baba Yaga drops the present during the night time because you don't see in a thermal camera whether the guy is tightened to the tree or not. The drone operator looks at the thermal trace and fire, or drop in the case of Baba Yaga. In this case, the Ukrainian drone was just lucky to film the guy during the daytime. By the way, if you wonder how Baba Yaga looks like, well, here it is. It's a calibration of the drone. You need to rotate it and move on the ground. The guys are laughing. And underneath there are usually mortar mines, heavy mortar mines of 120mm caliber. The minus of the drone that it's quite easy to detect it, that is why it operates during the night time, but the big plus that it may carry lots of the load. Alright, the movement of the Russian RIBM was spotted somewhere in Russia. It is RS-26 Rubesh, or maybe the modified version of it, which is called Oreshnik. Exactly the same Oreshnik which Putin already launched towards Ukraine. It doesn't mean that Russia may use the system again very soon, but they move those missiles. Sometimes it happens. Alright guys, again we have some of the new articles from the international press about the French-sponsored Ukrainian army brigade that has been badly botched. They speak about 155th Brigade. I already told you about the story. However, I have more details that the part of the brigade was trained in France, but roughly 2,000 army men were trained in Ukraine. And after the training of those who went to France finished, they went back to Ukraine. They joined those guys who trained in Ukraine. They didn't know each other before, they haven't seen each other, and they were sent to fight straight away to Pokrovsk. It's crazy. And because it was such a rush, they didn't receive enough drones, electronic warfare, and by the time volunteers were not aware about this newly created brigade, so they hadn't got any sort of the drones, almost no drones. Plus no drone protection was put on their armored vehicles, tanks, and for the combination of those reasons, in their first battle they suffered really heavy losses, and after that people started to desert from the brigade. And even before the fight, part of the soldiers from the brigade were taken by generals to the other brigades. It is madness. But luckily, because journalists and military bloggers spoke about it, we rose the common awareness about the situation, and Zelensky took the decision not to form new brigades, so there will be old brigades only, and it's a good decision. And here I question again the competence of Ukrainian military command. It seems like Zelensky has the information from the mass media from those scandals, and only after that he acts. It means that generals do not provide proper information to Zelensky, I guess. A British Prime Minister visited Kiev yesterday. More military packages were announced from UK, but those are quite limited compared to the United States. But you know what, guys, there are the talks now ongoing between France, Ukraine and UK to send the peacekeepers to Ukraine, I mean real soldiers. There are different variants of how those soldiers could be used in Ukraine. Some say that they might protect big cities like Kiev to release Ukrainian forces to fight on the front lines, or they may protect, for example, the border with Belarus. Ukraine keeps roughly 100,000 soldiers there, so obviously that would help Ukraine a lot. And also the peacekeeping mission could be after the ceasefire, then those forces would be deployed right at the border between Ukrainian forces and the Russian forces. It is not official border of Ukraine, but nevertheless it will help to maintain peace. But at the same time, Putin will never allow it to happen because he is strongly against any sort of the military intervention to Ukraine by the other countries, even for helping Ukraine to fight against his army. I would say it's quite logical in this case, right? And Ukraine showed some of the drones to the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, Starmer. Here's, by the way, Baba Yaga, you saw it, and many of the other drones presented. For me, this drone is interesting because here you can see the FPV drones right under the wing. So it's like a mother drone, which also may do some of the surveillance. Plus it carries two of the FPV drones, you can see them very close over here. And the mother drone is used to transmit the signals for those FPV drones, increasing the range significantly. A Russian member of parliament and also a deputy of the Russian Defense Committee, Zhuravlov, say that Russians should prepare for the possible massive mobilization. He said that as we see, the West is not stopping, they present real threat to the Russian sovereignty, so every man should think whether he would join the Russian army or not, and those who will not join, those are silly boys or something. So they prepare little by little their society for the possible future mobilization. And they also speak about it not in their State Duma but on their TV shows. There is the big article I published relative to the Bloomberg article about the possible peace deal around Ukraine. Long story short, as I tell you all the time, there will be no peace deal, robust peace deal, because Russia wants to continue, they want to occupy Ukrainian territories. Ukraine doesn't want to give all of that to Russia, including Zaporizhia and all of the claim to Russian territories Russia put in constitution. And Russia also demands for Ukraine not to use Western weaponry against it and to disarm Ukrainian army, like it should be roughly 80,000 soldiers. 80,000, and Russia in that case would occupy Ukraine kind of easily. By the way, guys, I also do the streams for members and for Patreons. I started to do it from today, so I'll do it once in 2 days or something, maybe 1 hour stream, just to speak with my audience. But again, it's Patreon special or membership special. That's why if you want to support the job that I do, you may go to the link and subscribe for my Patreon page, and we may communicate more often. This is kind of the interesting graph. It shows the spending of the countries relative to their GDP on their military. Here we speak about NATO countries. As we know, there is the mark of 2%, which is the recommended practice from the NATO alliance. It's not mandatory, by the way, but I think it will be mandatory in the future. United States, I guess 3.3, something like that. But GDP of the United States is absolutely enormous. That's why they have the most powerful military. But the countries like Portugal, Italy, Canada, Belgium, Luxembourg, Slovenia and Spain, they do not invest a lot into the military. Again, they should invest not into the United States, not into NATO itself, but into their own military forces. And you know, guys, geography explains a lot, so Poland is really concerned because Russia is nearby. Greece has some issues with Turkey, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, all of the countries are bordering Russia or Belarus. Denmark traditionally, and probably they'll invest more, as they say, to protect Greenland. United Kingdom also invests more than 2%, which is good, but Trump wants to raise it somewhere, I guess here. So none of the countries, including United States, is reaching the limit of 5%, but Mark Rutte in his latest conference said that all of the countries should at least reach 2% of GDP, and if United States somehow exits NATO, well, the rest of the countries should invest 8 up to 10% to secure themselves. We know against whom. Alright, and now let's go to the new military map update. Unfortunately for today, there is no movement from Ukrainian side. I mean positive movement, so just Russia gained more territories. Moreover, Russia occupied 3 of the settlements, Peshane, Solovyanka and Yasenova. So Peshane is over here. Let's zoom out. Yes, it's on the way to Pokrovsk. It was yesterday, it is today. Russia moves already towards Pokrovsk because this important road was cut. Russia also moves northbound to cut this important road. And Solovyanka is located here to the south from Pokrovsk and to the north from Kurakhova. Solovyanka was captured by Russians, and also Russians start to move with this very narrow attack. So yesterday and today Yasenova was also occupied. And here we see how Ukraine moves out from Dachna. I guess Ukraine will also move the forces. I think that after all Ukraine will withdraw everything from this pocket. I would say that the situation there is less critical compared to what is happening in Velika Novosilka. For the last 24 hours there was again the movement from the Russian forces, and yeah guys, this is now very difficult for Ukraine. Let me show you why. So here we have the satellite image. Let's zoom to the place. So I guess that Ukraine is unable to use this bridge any longer. So we may say that the Ukrainian forces are really trapped in Velika Novosilka because here is the obstacle, the river. It is quite wide, by the way. You can still cross it if you swim, but there is just a single bridge. It is here, and I think that there are no any on the map there are no any bridges, and I guess if the engineering bridges like Panton bridges, if they were not put before, they will not be put because Russia controls this area using their drones and artillery, so they will absolutely demolish any sort of the engineering equipment. So Ukrainian soldiers have the only way out from the Velika Novosilka across the river somewhere, and here's the spot with difficult terrain. So yeah, the situation there is not good at all. Whoever commands the defense of Velika Novosilka, well, the guy did many of the mistakes. First of all, Ukrainian forces were encircled in Makarivka, and now there is possible trap in Velika Novosilka from what you see on this map. Well, on a 3D map you see that Russians didn't take this village under control yet. Vremivka is still under Ukrainian control, however Russians move from this side, but this is not the accurate map. I trust deep state military map more. And here you see that the river here is kind of wide and terrain is very difficult to cross. So it will be very difficult for Ukraine to leave position in Velika Novosilka. The Maiko 73 gives us this picture, so according to his information, Russians didn't reach this bridge. So just deep state military map tells us that Vremivka was partially occupied. I guess I told you roughly 4 days ago that Ukraine should withdraw the forces, otherwise it would be too late. But if the deep state is really correct and Russians are here, it is already very late to evacuate heavy equipment or any sort of the equipment. Everything of that will be left in Velika Novosilka. Well, the rest of the changes, they are very minor. I already told you what worries me and concerns a lot. Wow, really beautiful. It's the missile Starship of Elon Musk, kaboomed after takeoff. But the first stage actually docked back to the launching spot. And there were tons of the traffic disturbances, many of the airplanes were on hold, many left the area and went to alternate because there were many of the debris in the sky. Yeah, the passengers for sure didn't like that launch of the SpaceX. My friends, and now I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are and have a great time.